All right, let's do some Photoshop. So let's fire up some Photoshop. So down at the bottom, you can click and you can type Photoshop and you can give it a launch. And it doesn't really matter which version you have. I'm sure we will all be relatively similar here. This is what you will see when you launch Photoshop. It might be a good idea to pin Photoshop to your taskbar. So if you right click your icon down here, you can go ahead and pin it to your taskbar so you can just click it in the future to launch it, just like that. All right, let's go ahead and let's create a new Photoshop file. Our first one, so exciting. When you go to create a new file, you will be invited to use all of these presets, which is no good for us. It's too complicated and we do not know enough to really take advantage of any of this crap. So let's just go ahead and keep it simple for now. So on the first tab, the recent tab, we don't have any really recent files. We've got a default one. So let's go ahead and let's create a quick preset because there's some cool things we can cover here. The most important being the height and width of our Photoshop project. Let's go ahead and change this to inches, because if this is inches, we can say that the width is 8.5 and the height is 11 inches. And the reason we are picking those numbers is because these two measurements are the measurements of pretty much any piece of paper you have in real life. So if you were to print a piece of paper, if you got a piece of paper in any of your classes, the width of that piece of paper is going to be 8.5 inches and the height is going to be 11 inches. Now by our orientation right now is set to portrait. Let's go ahead and let's click this button and make it landscape. So it's basically like we just flipped that piece of paper from right side up and we flipped it on its side. So now it is wider than it is taller. This next option is the resolution, and that's pretty much how defined our Photoshop file and pictures are going to be. Since we are dealing with inches, it's probably a good idea to switch this to pixels per inch. And now we see how many pixels well, let's not get into that, I guess. So by default, it's going to choose a 300 resolution. This is pretty good if you were actually going to print your piece of paper and use it in real life. If you're just going to make a digital copy, just create something for digital use, you can turn that resolution down to 75, let's say. It's just going to save you some time. For example, if you were going to create a picture for your website or something like that, if you had a lower resolution, that picture is going to load a bit quicker. And obviously if you were talking about one picture, this doesn't make a difference, but if you had multiple graphics being loaded on a digital platform, it might be beneficial to take advantage and try to maximize the efficiency of these pictures. A couple more things to talk about because it's good to know. Color mode. So by default, it's on RGB color. That is because it corresponds to the red, green, blue pixels you see on your computer screen. If you were printing in real life and actually printing a real picture, you might want to change this to CMYK color, which is the ink colors of the ink cartridge in your printer. However, we're not going to print this one, so let's just keep it at RGB and let's turn it up to 16-bit. Finally, the last important piece of information is probably the background contents. By default, it is white, so your picture will have a white background. Let's go ahead and choose transparent. Transparent background means that there is technically no background and you can actually see through the background. So maybe a bit hard to explain right now, and we might need to just work with some pictures before we can understand that. Let's go ahead and save this preset so we don't ever have to talk about any of this ever again, and we can just work on editing pictures. I'll give this preset a name. I'll call it, I don't know, 8.5 times 11, 75 resolution. Intro. I don't know what it's called. 8.5 by 11, 75 resolution, and intro, because this preset will be used here in our intro to Photoshop. Go ahead and click this save button, which is going to save the preset. And of course, they are going to ask us to choose a document name again. So I'll just call it 8.5 by 11, 75 resolution, intro. I'll save it that. Let's create, and this is what we are given. Now, this is a very boring looking Photoshop file because we have no pictures, so that's no fun. Let's get some pictures. So the easiest way to get pictures is to probably head over to Google, and let's find 3 pictures of literally anything you want. So I'm going to get 3 pictures of the greatest rock band of all time. Maybe you want to get some pictures of your favorite athlete or your favorite band or your favorite place. I don't care. 3 pictures. You choose. And I'm going to choose pictures that kind of look similar in terms of portraits. So I'm going to look for some landscape pictures. So let's get this one. And actually, that's probably not a good picture. Whatever, we'll use it. So find a picture, save image as, and it's probably a very good idea to make sure that you are saving to your H drive. So pretend this is my H drive, save it to your ICT folder, and maybe make a new folder called Photoshop. Now I have to be careful because when you're trying to save a photo, as I am right here, it is trying to save as a web file, a WebP file. That is no good, and there is an easy fix around that, but let's just not worry about that right now. So make sure you are seeing JPEGs or PNGs. So this picture is no good because it's a web file. And it's a really easy fix, but one thing at a time. So maybe I'll choose this picture. Save image as. And there we go. It's a JPEG, so it's good to go. Give your picture a name. Save it. And go ahead and find 3 pictures. Now make sure you have 3 pictures. Pause the video if you do not have those pictures yet. And resume the video once you do have those pictures. So I have my 3 pictures. So back in Photoshop, I'm going to go into File, and I'm going to go to Place Embedded. Place is basically paste, except in Photoshop, they call it Place. And hopefully you have your 3 pictures here. If you do not see your picture in your file, that's probably because it was a WebP file and not a JPEG or a PNG. So you're going to have to find another one. And let's get your pictures in here. So I've got one here. And when you import a picture, you can scale the picture just like so by clicking and dragging one of the corners of the photo. You can also click on the photo, click and drag to move the photo. And you can click just outside the corner to rotate it. So you can see, instead of clicking on the square, you can click just outside and it rotates the picture for you. So place your first picture like so, and then you can click your little check mark when you are satisfied with your transformation. Let's go ahead and get all of your pictures. There's another one. I'm going to do one of these numbers. Anyways, fast forwarding, here I have all my 3 pictures in my Photoshop file. If you do not have your 3 pictures yet, just pause the video and resume it once you do. So let's talk about layers. In the bottom right section of your Photoshop environments, you should see this Layers tab. You can click and drag the tab out, and just to make it a little bit easier to work with, because layers are very important in video editing. Now, each of these 3 photos you placed in your Photoshop file is on a separate layer. And you can click this little icon to see which layer is which. So for example, this top layer called Rush 3 right now is the picture that is flashing on your Photoshop. So I'm just going to call this, you can double click the name of your layer to give it a new one. So I'm going to say Rush Bottom, because this picture is on the bottom. This picture is this one. So I can double click, whoops, I don't want to go there. I can double click the name and I can say Rush Right, because it is the picture on the right. And this one I'll call Rush Left, just to make my life a little bit easier, and just so I know which pictures I'm using here. Now also, just as when we placed these photos into our Photoshop file, we were scaling them and we were moving them around and doing all that fun stuff. If you do not like how your photos look and you want to change that again, click on whichever layer you want. So for example, I'm going to choose this bottom image. You can go to Edit, and you can go to Transform. Actually, the free transform will work. And the free transform has a Control-T hotkey. So example, you can click that, and you're back into the initial mode where when you first place them, you could change all these, scale and rotate them, stuff like that. So I'm going to make this picture a bit bigger. I'm going to choose my Rush Left layer. I'm going to go Control-T. I'm going to make this one a bit bigger. Maybe rotate it a bit more. And my Rush Right one, I'll choose that layer, Control-T, I'll make it a bit bigger. Just like that. Maybe it's a bit too big. And click my check mark. So here are my 3 pictures, and you'll notice that they are overlapping each other. So that is how layers work in any photo editing or video editing software. So for example, this layer is at the top, which means it is on the top. It's the top layer of this Photoshop file. So for example, it's kind of confusing because I called it Rush Bottom, but the layer is at the top. If I click and drag this layer to the bottom, it is the bottom layer, which means it is hidden amongst all the other pictures. The other pictures sit on top of it. So you can think of each of these pictures like a piece of paper. And whichever layer is on the bottom is the first piece of paper that gets laid down. So everything else on top of it sits literally on top of the layer. So you can see if I move it to the top, it is the top layer. It's the layer that we see the most of. So just something to experiment with. It might be worth adjusting and seeing which ones you like. I'll maybe do one of these. I like that one better. Cool. There's some more things you can play with here in the layer window. once again, a lot of stuff. Let's keep it simple. So this button right here lets you add a new layer. And let's say I want to add a new layer that's just a solid color. And this is going to pop up. And I'm going to pick a nice, nice little navy blue. You can choose whatever color you want. Hit OK. And uh-oh, what happened here? I've lost one of my pictures. Well, remember what we said. These layers go all on top of each other. So this picture on the bottom is the very first layer. And I just added a new solid color, which is sitting on top of this layer. So I have to move this solid color to the very bottom of the stack. So now you can see that this is my first layer, and then we slap this picture on, we slap the second picture, and then we slap the third picture on. That's how layers work. Let's do one more thing to this simple introduction. Let's choose this little T icon, which allows us to create some text. So if you press that T icon, then you can click and drag to create a text box. Let go of your mouse and you'll notice you have a new layer. So you should have 5 layers now. The text is highlighted by default, so you can go ahead and type some text. I'll just put Rush, the name of the band, and you can put whatever text you want. And we've got some options up here. So for example, this box lets you choose the text color. I can't really see my text right now. In fact, I think I'm gonna have to make it completely white in order to see my text. Now careful, because you have to highlight your text and then choose what color you want it to be. I've noticed I've got this really big text box and I don't really need that much space. So I can just shrink it up a little bit to match my words. You can change your font here if you don't like it. You can change the size of your font. So for example, highlighting my text and changing it to, I don't know, let's do 72. And now I have to make my text box a bit bigger. You can align your text with these buttons. So I could align it to the center of my text box by pushing this. And just artistically, I might just do one of these numbers. I might put some spaces in between. Once you're happy with your text, you can hit the check mark, and then you can choose the Move tool by clicking this button or pressing V, and you can move your text. So I might put it down there. Once again, notice that the text layer is at the very top. And if I slid it down behind these pictures, you can see it starts to disappear. So I just really want to make sure you understand how layers work. So whatever you want to see, basically this is your top layer. So put your text at the very top. So it goes on top of everything else. We're done with the layers, so you can click and drag this panel and just put it back here where it was. And let's go ahead and save your first Photoshop file. So you can go File, and there's 2 things you can save here. So for example, the Save As is going to save your Photoshop file. So in your ICT folder, in your new Photoshop folder, you could call this one Intro, and you could save it. This is going to pop up. You can hit Don't Show Again, okay, yada, yada, yada. Now what you've done is you've saved a Photoshop file. You haven't actually saved this picture. So if you wanted to use this picture in another project, what you have to do is you have to go to File, and then you have to go to Export. And you could go to Export As. For now, the three things, well, really the two things we're going to worry about are the PNGs and the JPEGs. PNGs deal with transparency. So we don't have anything that's transparent right now. So let's just export it as a JPEG. You have a quality slider if you wanted to make your picture have more pixels or whatever. Doesn't really matter. And so what you can do is you can hit this little export button, which is being hidden down there. Maybe in your Photoshop folder, you should have a folder called exports. And this folder will contain all of your Photoshop exports. Save it. And there we go. So now in your Photoshop folder, you should have your intro Photoshop file, but you also have your exported picture. So your actual Photoshop picture that you created and you can use in any project, in any software, in any program. Whereas the Photoshop file will just take you back to your Photoshop. It was kind of like rendering in Blender. Like you could render a picture, but then you could actually save the Blender file, two different things. So that's what we're doing here. All right, there's your intro to Photoshop. Nothing too crazy, and there's some real cool things we're going to do with this software, but let's just keep it simple for now.